Good morning. Welcome to our Native Wildflowers and Shrubs for Pollinators program. My name is Kim Toal. I'm the Ag Agent for Fayette County. Just a quick disclaimer this morning. We will be recording this, so please make sure that you're muting your mics and your video. And this presentation this morning was adapted from a presentation by our retired county agent, Brian Maddie. I would like to mention too that we're not going to be discussing large trees or small trees today. We will be discussing that next week. So if you are interested in some of those options, please make sure to tune in next week. So this morning we want to talk a little bit why we should be concerned about using native plants and why they should be incorporated into our landscapes. Potentially native plants can be more adaptable to our area. However, just be mindful that they do have specific requirements just like any other plant that you would purchase. So please make sure that you're researching what type of plant you're interested in and what type of conditions it requires for adequate growth to make sure that you're making a really positive and great selection for your space. Native plants can also too provide more reliable sources of nectar because they're going to be blooming at different times of the year. There's going to be a large range of them that you can put into your landscapes. So keep that in mind. When you are selecting as to what time of year it blooms and what specific pollinators may be visiting those spaces. It can also too extend the flowering season, and they may be a little bit more hardy than some of our exotics or other plants that you may be selecting. So there are some really great benefits to using native plants in general, but again, as I've already mentioned, please just make sure that you know what those specific environmental conditions are for those native plants, that what they're going to need to grow and develop really, really well in your space, and then you're selecting the right ones for your specific area. So this morning we're going to kind of talk about some of these concepts about what is a native plant, why do we want to use them, what does a native plant garden look like, and what are some examples of perennials and shrubs. So native plants are going to be plants that are going to grow naturally in a particular region without specific intervention from humans. They also too can be present in a particular area prior to a European settlement. They have inhabited a particular region for thousands of years, or they're naturally occurring either presently or historically in any ecosystem in the United States. So native plants can have a lot of different interpretations, and you can view that many different ways. But those native plants are really going to be useful with our native bees, our pollinators, some other beneficial insects as well. And so we really want to try to encourage the native plants and incorporate them into our landscapes as best that we can. So why should we use those native plants? We can use them to help enhance our wildlife habitats or develop a wildlife habitat. Some of our native plants, obviously today we're talking about pollinators, so bees and insects and those beneficial insects, but they also too may produce some sort of a berry or a seed that can be consumed by other animals as well. They may be adapted to local conditions. Again, though, I just want to reiterate that there are going to be different native plants that are going to grow in different areas in our state. So please just make sure that you've selected the right ones for your area. And also too, we want to do that ecological preservation. We have a lot of invasive plants that are actually shading out and dominating over our native plants. And so we want to try to preserve those native plants, incorporate them back in, and try to get rid of some of those invasive species in our habitat areas. So what does a native plant look like? It's really going to be a beautiful representation of a lot of different types of plants, diversity of different types of plants, and it may to some look a little bit wild, but to others, you know, this is extremely beautiful. So again, your opinion and your presentation and where you're going to be putting these plants may vary, and so the selection may vary as well depending upon if you want an evergreen or a deciduous tree or shrub, if you want to have a plant that's going to be producing different types of flowers, or maybe it's just going to be an evergreen, something along those lines. So depending upon where you're going to be putting these plants in and what space it's going to be will also to help you with some of that selection. I feel like that native plant gardens should look very naturalized. I think that having a diversity of different types of plant material and colors and bloom times really allows for that diversification of those different types of insects and pollinators that are going to come visit that space. So here is just an example here of a small area that could be incorporated in. This is a tulip poplar, so this is one of those trees that we're going to talk about next week, Fothergilla, and then Virginia Sweetspire. So you can mix these plants together, making sure that they have the same environmental conditions, so that way they're all going to be thriving in that space. And you can really mix that in to have a beautiful area in native plantings. So how do you put it together? As with any location that you're wanting to start, you want to make sure that you have properly site selected and prepared that space appropriately. So you want to make sure that depending upon the plants that you're choosing, whether or not they need shade or sun, that you have that appropriate environmental conditions that are needed. You want to get your soil tested just to make sure that nutritionally speaking, the pH is proper for those plants. You want to make sure that you're site preparing that space. So kill any kind of grass or weeds that may be in that space. Space out the plants appropriately depending upon how large they're going to be getting. When you first put in a garden, it may look very sparse. It may look like you don't have enough plants, but you have to realize that over time these plants are going to get much larger. And so keeping in mind how large the plants are going to get at maturity to make sure that you are properly spacing them and you're not going to have to come in to remove some, or you can also to reduce your potential for disease development as well, because that the air is able to move through the plants, dry off the leaves, and really have a really nice location for it to grow. You do want to provide irrigation at least in the first year of establishment. Although they are native plants, they do need to be established appropriately, and they are going to require a little bit more water in the first year because they have just come out of that container or space where you've collected them from, and they need to be acclimated and they need to grow into that space. And so you want to make sure that they are properly cared for at the beginning, and then once they are established, they will pretty much be able to withstand some of those environmental changes, again, if the right plant has been selected for the right location. And then you want to mulch it properly. You want to make sure that you add a layer of mulch to help with moisture retention. It's also too going to help keep those roots cooler during those hot periods of time, and it's going to make it look a little bit more complete and designed just as it's starting to fill in. Those plants are trying to fill in and spread into that space. You do want to make sure that you're using the right type of mulch. You're going to want to use either pine straw or those bark style mulches to make sure that you're getting a good even layer. You want to try to use natural mulches as much as possible because they will break down and they will contribute to that organic material in the soil. You do want to use a variety of foliar textures and colors. As you can see here, there's going to be plants that are going to be blooming at different times of the year. That's also too going to help with just visual interest as well. You know, you want to see different colors, different insects, different things flying around all throughout the year. So make sure to try to incorporate in that variety for visual and also to pollinator interest. So what we're first going to do this morning is we're going to talk about some plant options for you. This is not an exhaustive list of perennials and shrubs, so I just want to make that very clear. This information I adapted from the Guide to Propagation and Characteristics of Georgia Natives. It was put together by Heather Alley. She's our conservation horticulturalist with the State Botanical Garden of Georgia. I do have links toward the end of this presentation to these materials that you can then review and get some additional information specific to natives in our area. So the first plant that we're going to talk about this morning is the common blue star. It is an herbaceous multi-stem perennial that grows to be about 2 to 3 feet tall. It does have star-shaped blue flowers that come out in the spring. It does like to be in shade to part shade, and it does require those sandy, well-drained soils. It is a favorite of hummingbirds, butterflies, and some moths. So this one is going to be a great plant if you have some of that shaded area and you're looking for a plant to incorporate in that will bloom. It is, this picture here is appears to be a little bit more of a whiter bloom, but it is a beautiful bluish purple color to incorporate in your space. Eastern Columbine, this one is mostly evergreen, but it is a short-lived perennial. It gets to be about 12 inches tall, and it has these beautiful red flowers with a yellow throat that kind of droops down in the early spring. It does like shade to part shade. It does like well-drained sandy soils and loamy soils, but it is a favorite of hummingbirds and butterflies. So this one would be one to incorporate into some of those shaded areas. It will colonize very easily. It does reproduce by seeds, and so the seeds will be spread and it will kind of take over those woodland areas. But it is a very, very attractive plant. Swamp milkweed, which is an Asclepias species. It is a herbaceous, unbranched perennial. It gets to be about 3 to 6 feet tall. It does have these beautiful light pink to purple flowers from June until about October. It does like sun to part shade, and it is a favorite amongst butterflies and bees. It is also too the host plant, one of the host plants for the monarch butterfly. There's a lot of Asclepias species, and so monarchs will only come to Asclepias species to lay their eggs and for their caterpillars to consume. So keep that in mind and make sure that you're selecting the right type of Asclepias species if you're wanting to increase monarch populations and put that into your gardens. Butterfly weed, this is an Asclepias tuberosa. It is a herbaceous perennial. It gets to be about 1 to 2 feet tall. It does have orange blooms that bloom from May to July, and sometimes it may bloom in October, just depending on the location and our weather patterns for that year. It does like well-drained soils. Again, it does have a lot of visibility with your butterflies and your bees, and it is that host plant for that monarch caterpillar. Wild blue indigo, which is a Baptisia species. This is an upright perennial that gets to be about 2 to 4 feet tall. It does tolerate a wide range of soils, so this one will pretty much adapt itself to a lot of different conditions. It does produce these pea-shaped blue flowers in May or June. There also too is the false indigo, which is a yellow flower. So you may have seen that somewhere as well. But this one is going to like to be in sun to part shade, and it benefits your bees. So if you're trying to encourage those bees, those beneficial insects, those native bees, this one is going to be a great one to incorporate into your spaces. Green and gold. This one is a low-growing, nearly evergreen plant. It does kind of resemble a little bit of wild strawberries or strawberry plants. It does grow very low to the ground. It does produce bright yellow flowers in April and then periodically through until October. It does like to be in the sun or in part shade in a well-drained medium shade area. And it does benefit the bees. So this one is just a bright pop of color early in the year, and it really is an attractive plant. We have this growing in our education garden behind our office, and it's just a low growing ground cover that will just colonize and take over and produce these beautiful little yellow flowers. Rattlesnake Master is a perennial that does not really have that bright, showy bloom that you would think about with some of our plants that we're looking for pollinators, but it produces this really unique flower head that looks like thistles. And as you can see here, this is a honeybee visiting, and there's tiny little flowers all along that little thistle-looking seed head. And so it is a really great plant to incorporate in. It kind of gives you some of that visual interest, looks a little different. Just to kind of incorporate again some of that other texture that we were talking about earlier. It does like to be in full to part sun. It does like average dry and well-drained soils, of course, but it also too is a great plant for the black swallowtail caterpillars and those native bees. Cardinal flower is probably one of the most iconic plants that we see in North America. It is a beautiful plant that produces a green rosette, and then it produces these beautiful 2 to 4 feet red flower spikes in the midsummer. It does like to be in moist, well-drained, rich soils in full sun or part shade. Hummingbirds love to visit it. It does have those red tubular flowers that are consistent with hummingbirds and what they like, how they like to actually put their beaks and their tongues in to actually take up that nectar. But it also too is a great plant for those bees, butterflies, and moths. Bee balm is a fragrant perennial in the mint family that can grow up to 4 feet tall. Since it is in the mint family, it does produce a lot of runners and it does like to spread and colonize in the area. It also too will produce some seeds as well. So it is though easy to pull. So if you notice that it's kind of encroaching upon other areas, you can pull it out and transplant it to a new space. But it does produce these really unique looking flower heads. It's just it's a beautiful plant. We see a lot of pollinators and beneficial insects on this plant in our education garden. We do have a large range of these Monardia species, so we have natives as well as some other ones, and so they really are a beautiful plant to incorporate in. It does like full sun to part shade, and it does tolerate a wide range of soils. So again, this is another one that can adapt to different environmental conditions once it has been properly established. And it is a great source for native bees. Our wild blue phlox is a compact perennial that can get up to 1 foot high, so it stays a little bit smaller than some of our other plants we've mentioned. It does like to be in well-drained soils. Part shade to shade is what it requires or tends to prefer, and it will benefit bees early in the spring when other plants may not be in bloom at that time. So this one, again, we've talked in previous programs, or maybe you've heard, to allow for, if you're going to be doing a pollinator garden, to allow for season-long nectar sources and having those plants that are blooming in different seasons. And so this one's going to be a great one for that early spring. Yellow prairie coneflower is a plant that will get to be about 4 feet tall, so it will get very tall, but it produces these beautiful yellow daisy-like flowers that they'll open up and they'll look like a daisy or a coneflower, and then the petals will start to fall and you'll see that really prominent seed head where those pollinators are going to be visiting to take up nectar and of course move pollen around. It does tolerate a wide range of soils. It does like to be in the full sun, and it's going to benefit those native bee populations. Hoary Skullcap is a plant that gets to be about 2 to 3 feet tall. It has these clusters of beautiful tubular shaped flowers in late summer. It does tolerate that large range of soil again. So again, these are some great plants to incorporate in, and they will establish and develop in those spaces. It does like to be in sun or part shade, and it benefits those native bee populations. So as you can see, those were not 30. There are many, many, many more plants available for you to look at and see about incorporating into your space. So I would encourage you again to research more in these publications that I'm going to provide a little bit later, and see about what plants you would like to incorporate in. And if you have any kind of questions, we'll be happy to answer those for you. You can send us an email. If you are not from Fayette County and you're visiting us from another county this morning, I would recommend that you contact your local county extension office for information regarding native plants for your area. Now we're going to move into some of those shrubs. This presentation was adapted from our UGA publication on native trees, shrubs, and woody vines. We also too have a presentation from the university for wildflowers, ferns, and so there are many, many, many different publications that we have available for you to review through. They're very large publications, so you can take that and research and read a lot about those, and then select those plants that will do well for you, that you like, and that will be suitable for that space that you have. So first off this morning, we're going to talk about the Bottlebrush Buckeye. We do have this out in our education garden, and this one gets very large. It produces these beautiful white flowers in March, and it looks like a brush. It looks like a bottle brush, which is where it gets its name, Bottlebrush Buckeye. The bees are on top of this plant all throughout that season. They are really out there. They're colonizing those flowers. It's wonderful to see them flying around. So this one is really going to draw in those bees into that space. But as you can see, it's going to get to be a very, very large shrub. It will provide you with season-long interest. So not only does it have this beautiful green foliage, it then produces this really attractive flower in March, and then it's going to actually provide some yellow color in the fall. So this one has some season-long interest for you as well. So you want to make sure that that you put it in an area with part shade, an area that has good moisture, and you want to try to prune it after bloom if you want to try to increase that diversity in that canopy of that plant. The red buckeye, we also do have one of these in our garden as well. This one only really likes to have moist areas. It gets to be about 12 to 15 feet tall, and it will defoliate in drought very early. So it will let you know if that area is really not the best for it, due to it will start to drop its leaves and just look overall less than attractive for you. The ruby-throated hummingbirds do love this plant. It does produce that red tubular shaped flower, and it will flower well in shade, but it does better if it gets that half sun day. So if you can get that morning sun and afternoon shade in a moist area, that's really going to be ideal for the red buckeye. American beautyberry is a deciduous shrub that gets to be about 4 feet tall. It is known for these beautiful purple berry clusters that go all up along the stems here of the plant. It is in the berries here are great for birds, but the flowers here that are produced are wonderful for those pollinators. So this one can really be incorporated into increase those wildlife habitats. It is a great plant for flower arrangements as well. If you're interested in that, you just would clip off these berries and remove these leaves, and these beautiful purple berries will stay in those arrangements if you like to do that. There are different colors, so depending upon the variety that you choose, it will change the color of the berries. So you can have anywhere between purple, white, pink berries all in your garden, just to kind of increase that diversity in your space. Sweet shrub is a deciduous shrub, about 6 to 10 feet tall, and it has these sweet scented purple brown flowers in spring, so it is blooming right now. We have one on our walking trail around the lake near my home, and so we are seeing it blooming now. It does have an upright form, and the leaves will turn yellow in the fall to provide some of that visual interest. It does grow along fertile woodlands, hillsides, and sandy stream areas. It's considered to be an heirloom garden plant. There is another variety, a cultivar, excuse me, called Athens that has yellow blooms instead of the red one. So depending upon the variety that you're choosing, you may see, or the cultivar that you're choosing, you may see the blooms look a little bit different. But this is a sweet shrub. If you crush the foliage, also too has a very spicy aroma. So it has a lot of really great interest for you. This is summer sweet Clearatha. Cleara. It is a deciduous shrub to about 5 feet. It has a lot of these little white flower spikes for about 4 to 6 weeks in the summer. So you could actually plant that Bottlebrush Buckeye and then come with this one too to get that season-long flower spikes if you like that. That flower spike look kind of like a bottle brush in those different areas. It is a favorite among hummingbirds and butterflies. They like that spicy fragrance, and it likes to be in wet, acidic soils with full sun to partial shade. So this is just kind of the growth height, the size of that plant, and then up close of those flowers. We also too have the strawberry bush, or Euonymus. It's also too called Hearts of Burston. This plant has a distinctive strawberry pod with a coral seed in the fall. So this is what it's going to look like in the fall for you, as well as it's going to be putting on its leaves. Foliage will turn this bronzy reddish color. In the spring of the year, you'll see that you'll have these flowers, which is going to be attractive to those butterflies and bees. The stems are going to stay green year round, so it will have that visual interest throughout the year. It does grow to be about 5 feet. It prefers to be in shade and moist areas, but that are well drained. The seeds are going to be great for turkeys and other kind of game in those woodland habitat areas. Dwarf Fothergilla is a multi-season native plant that has visual interest throughout the year. In the dwarf form, it's going to get to be about 3 to 5 feet. It does have this really attractive fall color from scarlet to yellow, so you get a lot of different color diversity there. It is going to tolerate seasonal changes and environmental changes such as drought and occasional wetness. So again, it will kind of adapt itself to that space accordingly. It does prefer acidic soils. So again, getting that soil test done before you get planting on any kind of native plant or any other plant species is really going to be important, so you know what you're dealing with and you can make sure that you're selecting the right plants appropriately. It does like to be in partial shun or partial shade. So depending upon those environmental conditions, you can select this plant to incorporate in. Your Oakleaf Hydrangea is a beautiful shrub that you can incorporate in, and it'll get very large and it will flower on old wood. As you can see, this one also too provides some of that season-long interest. You've got these beautiful flowers in a panicle style that's going to be blooming from the bottom upwards. In the fall, you'll see the foliage will turn a reddish color and stay until it falls off late into the winter time. It is going to flower on old wood. So if you notice that you want to prune it and just kind of shape it up a little bit, you're going to want to prune it after bloom. There are many different cultivars available for you to choose from. And so it really depends on what will be different. Oftentimes is going to be the petals, how many number of petals is going to be on that panicle. And it will bush out, and some of them will get very, very tall. Some of them have been developed to be a little bit shorter. So keep that in mind when you're selecting that you're going to have this in an area that it will be allowed to grow fully. I like it to be, I have it in a woodland area right in the back of my home, and I want it to grow and be naturalized and spread and look just, you know, like it's always been there. But if you do need to prune because there's a disease or something like that, you can prune that out at any time of year. If there's a branch that got broken off due to some sort of a windstorm or something fell on it, you can actually prune that out any time of year. But if you're going to be pruning for shaping purposes, again, please make sure that you do it right after that plant blooms. If you do it at the wrong time of year, you may be sacrificing the blooms for the next year. So it's not going to, you know, damage the plant per se, but you may be sacrificing some of those blooms. Gallberry or inkberry is an evergreen plant that is very versatile in our landscapes. It likes to be in the sun or in shade in moist only areas. So if you have some of those areas that are just kind of stay wet and damp, this one may be one to incorporate in to have a nice ground cover and spread throughout that landscape. It does get to be about 8 feet tall. It is a great plant for wildlife purposes and for bees. As you can see here in the spring, it will put out these little tiny white flowers that will then give way to these purple berries. And this one is going to be a great one for those birds and other kind of wildlife that consume berries. So you can really, this can be a multi-purposeful plant to include in your landscape. Some of the compact varieties or cultivars will actually stay a lot smaller and be more dense. So it could be a replacement for those Japanese hollies if you have one that you're looking to remove or you're just trying to slowly incorporate in more native plants and switch out some plants. You can actually use this one as a substitute for those Japanese hollies. Florida anise is a great shade plant for moist soils. It is an evergreen. and it'll get to be about 10 feet tall. I really, really love this plant. When you crush the leaves, it does have that spicy smell as well. And I really think that the flowers on them are very attractive. Some people have a different opinion. Some, they're not big, huge, showy flowers, but they will produce a good number of them all throughout the space. So I would recommend to put this plant in if you have a shaded area. They will get really tall, so they could act as a nice privacy hedge. If they're not going to get so tall that you're never going to see your neighbors, but if you just want to kind of block maybe along a fence line or something along those lines to create that nice shaded plant there. But there would need to be some of those larger trees to, again, to provide that shaded condition that is required for this plant. Now this one is the yellow anise. It is in the same family, but it's going to look a little different. So this one is still going to be an evergreen. It is going to grow a little faster than the Florida anise, but the blooms on it is going to be not that red, bright red. It's going to be more of a cream yellow color bloom, but this one will tolerate more sun. So if you have an area maybe that has more sun and you like the evergreen, the texture of the leaves, and you just like this plant overall, and maybe the Florida anise doesn't work for you, you can potentially put in this yellow anise. So again, this one is going to have a lot of those same characteristics. It's going to get to be about 6 to 10 feet tall. It's going to have the same shaped leaves. It's going to be that evergreen texture, but again, that flower is going to be a little bit different. Virginia Sweetspire is a deciduous medium growth plant that is great for fall color. In the spring, it'll put out these tubular, panicle style shaped flowers. There's multiple blooms all along this, and it really likes to be in those moist, fertile soils. You may have this one popping up in a woodland area, and you may not know that that's what it is. I know that I have one that popped up, and I didn't know what it was, and it's actually this native plant that was incorporated in, and I never knew that that's what it was, because I live in an area that had maybe like most of you, I live in a neighborhood that a lot of things were moved around and discarded whenever they were building all of the homes, and so I was very excited that I had this plant naturally growing in a back wooded area that I have. It does like those moist soils, like I've already mentioned, but it will be a great plant in full sun to light shade. So if you get that morning sun, maybe 6 to 8 hours of sun, then you can, in some light shade, this one will do really well for you. Mapleleaf Viburnum is a deciduous, low-growing plant that's going to bloom in April in moist, shady areas. So it will produce these really attractive flowers. They do resemble a little bit of a hydrangea style flower. They are not hydrangeas, but they have that same kind of open palm style of the one of our hydrangeas that we have. They are going to bloom in April. They do best in those shaded sites, like I've already mentioned, but they do produce black fruit for birds and wildlife. They will colonize that understory amongst your large deciduous trees. And again, the shapes of the leaves, they do look like maple leaves. This is just a really attractive plant. You can see that the blooms on them are not, diameter wise super large, but they do produce a large amount of these small, probably $half size, maybe a little larger blooms all along that plant. And then, of course, we have some of these deciduous azaleas. There are so many different varieties of deciduous azaleas. You can get different colors. Some of them actually do a little bit better in more sun than others. So when you are researching and looking at some of these different deciduous azalea species, the rhododendron species, you can actually determine which color you want to do. You can actually select those and then put them in. Some of our azaleas do well, along those streams or along banks where lakes and streams are. Some of them like to be a little bit more of an upland. So depending upon the location and where you've planted them, and which one you've chosen will change kind of that environmental specifics for those. But that is all indicated in these publications that I'm going to provide for you, so you can really read through, determine all of the characteristics of these plants, and determine which one is going to do the best for you in that space. So for more information on native plants, we have this complete guide to native plants for Georgia. This is actually a compilation of all of those native plant publications that I have mentioned. It is a very large file. It will take a little while for it to load potentially, but it includes everything regarding the location, habitat, where to put it in your space, how to care for it, and what sort of pollinators or beneficial insects, or why does it have any value in the landscape for habitat purposes and things along those lines. So it is a wonderful publication. Again, it'll be trees, shrubs, vines, wildflowers, ferns, so a large range of different types of variety for you to look through and to then help you to select some of those plants. I also too included that guide to propagation and characteristics of favorite Georgia natives. This one again is put out by the State Botanical Gardens of Georgia. It's by our horticulture conservation specialist, Heather Alley. And this one will talk about specifics related to pollinators and perennials in native plants. And she's included 30 of them. There's many, many more, I'm sure, but this one is just the first in a series that she's putting together for our pollinators and to help you to incorporate in some of these native plants into those landscapes. So where can I purchase native plants? What do I need to do whenever I'm selecting these native plants? When you are selecting, please make sure that you note the genus and species. When selecting these varieties, there may be some that are going to be more suited for other areas, and they may be a part of the same family, but they may not be considered on that native plant list. Do your research to make sure that the plants that you've selected will do well in your area. Regardless if they're native or not, they do have specific requirements, and so you want to make sure that you're selecting the right types of plants for the specific conditions that you have, because you don't want to be putting in a plant thinking that, okay, well, I'm incorporating in these native plants and they're going to do really, really well, and then they don't do well because they weren't in the right location. So just make sure that you keep that in mind. Some potential sources of native plant material. This again is not an exhaustive list. There is many places where you can find this material, but you can look for seed companies that provide native plant seeds. Look for your local native plant societies to see if maybe you want to join them. Nurseries, there are nurseries that will specialize in native plants only, so you can look for those. Or a lot of our nurseries, if you go to them and ask them for these specific plants, they will see about getting them on hand for you and you know, supplying them for you to purchase. So just go and talk with some of your nurseries to see if this is an option and if they can get that material for you. There's also two native plant gardens that have sales and different activities. They also too do educational programs, so you can check out those locations to see if they're offering plants that you've been looking for. And also too, some of our extension master gardener extension volunteers that conduct different plant sales, oftentimes they may have some native plants there as well that you can purchase. So there are many different areas and locations that you can get native plant material. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There's probably many, many other locations for material. So just take that time to do your research. Do research on specifically what plants am I interested in, what plants are going to do well in my space, and this is what I'm going to look for. So then you can look at these different places and select from those different places that are going to have the material that you're looking for, whether it's from seeds, maybe it's from transplants, different things along those lines. So credits this morning, I do want to thank Brian Maddie. He is a retired Troup County A&R agent for this presentation that he allowed me to use as I was putting together this presentation this morning. Also to Heather Alley's Guide to Propagation and Characteristics of Georgia Natives is a really great publication that I would encourage you to look at. And then, of course, our Tree, Shrubs, and Woody Vines publications by Gary Wade has a lot of really useful information and wonderful pictures and descriptions and how to grow these different plants in your landscapes. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them at this time. If you are tuning in from Fayette County, this is our Fayette County information here. If you are not, I would encourage you to go to extension.uga.edu where you can find your local county office. You can also find publications on there regarding natives, any other kind of gardening material, vegetable gardening, lawns, care, things along those lines. We do have a Facebook page that anyone is welcome to like. It's Fayette County Extension. We also do have a Facebook group where we are posting posts every day on different topics. You can also post pictures if you need things identified or if you have a question. That's called Fayette Extension Horticulture Corner. So please feel free to like those or be a part of that group if you're interested in that, so you can get some of that just interactive information from our office. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take them this morning. You can either type them in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask that question. If, though, you don't have a question today and you would like to email us a question a little bit later, please just use our email address. It's right here. You can also call our office and we'll be happy to help you as well.